Yes. So today we want to talk about alcohols. 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 That's what we want to talk about. And specifically, we want to talk about making alcohols. Making alcohols. Making. Let's spell making. Making alcohol. Making alcohols. Right. So that's what we want to talk about specifically. So there are two ways of making alcohols. Rather, there are more ways, but I think it will be helpful to talk about the main two ways that are used in industry, and then we are going to talk about the other way. And we can make alcohols by fermentation. Fermentation, or we can make alcohols from alkenes. Alkenes. Right. So there's that. This is what is actually done in industry. So that's the reason why we want to look at the two. So by fermentation, obviously we are actually making the alcohols from sugar. Right. So we are making the alcohols from sugar. So really, if we're making the alcohol from sugar, no plus, it should be done actually in the absence of oxygen, the absence of oxygen, right? And we are going to get obviously our alcohol, C2H5 OH, right? And obviously plus plus carbon dioxide, and this will be our equation, right? Let's check if the equation is balanced. We've got 4 carbons, and yeah, or 6 carbons, right? 12 hydrogens, 10 12 hydrogens, and um, 4 2 4 oxygen, 2 4 6 oxygens, right? So that's what we get. And then we can make this alcohol by, and the conditions obviously that we are going to need are, obviously we are going to need yeast, right? And it should be in the absence of oxygen. No oxygen is needed, because for those that will know that it is an anaerobic process, for those that do biology, right? Or we can make this from alkenes, and obviously it will be in the hydrolysis plus steam in this case, right? And we are going to get our output, C2H5 OH. That's what we are going to get, and that's what is happening. This is actually an addition reaction, right? What we do is that we are adding the oxygen from this, and it's obviously an electrophilic addition, and that's important for us to actually remember, right? Because we have already talked about our reactions of alkenes, and in this case we are adding water, right? So what do we need for this reaction to happen? We say that we obviously are going to need it's important for us to know that we need a catalyst, right? And also we are going to need, and this is important, concentrated. And always put concentrated because people forget that, because that's what that is one of the conditions. Concentrated sulfuric acid or phosphoric acid. Right. Those are the things that you are going to need for this reaction to happen. Right. And obviously the next thing that we need to remember is to talk about the advantages and disadvantages, because they like talking about disadvantages and disadvantages. Obviously, we need to talk about advantages of this and obviously disadvantages. Right. Disadvantages. Disadvantages. Right. What are the advantages of this process? You need to know that sugar is renewable, because we're looking for sugar is renewable. It is renewable, and the other thing is that they like talking about this thing, this process, this thing. I don't know whether it is correct or not, but it sounds like people are intelligent, especially in this time where there is problems of, when people are so aware of the environment and stuff like that. They say that it is actually carbon neutral. And we are going to talk about what it means actually to be carbon neutral in a minute. And it is a very important buzzword to talk about the carbon neutrality of using this, because what you need to remember is that this actually is a biofuel. It is a biofuel, which means that it is made out of plants. And we'll talk about it in the next slide, but for now I've just introduced that. Right, so sugar is actually a biofuel and it is made out of plants. It is made from plants actually. Right, and sugar, the disadvantages is of using sugar as a fuel. And the other advantage, which I had almost forgotten, is that it is actually cheap. The equipment that you use for making this is actually very, very cheap. You can actually make alcohol from your house or from home, and that is, I don't recommend it for you to do it, but in other countries it might be even illegal to do that, but yeah, you make it from this. The other the disadvantage, maybe if we put disadvantages in red, I don't know whether that is red, but let's see. The disadvantage for using this thing is that it is a batch process. What it means is that for those that do business studies, they understand what it means to a batch process. What it means is that because you're using yeast in this process, what happens is that you need to remember that yeast is going to be killed as soon as alcohol is produced, because alcohol actually yeast cannot survive in alcoholic conditions, so it means that it is going to be killed in there. And then what it means that is this: you will need to distill out the yeast, right? Which means that you've got to stop the reaction or stop the process so that you remove the yeast. And after you've removed, after you've distilled this, what is going to happen is that you will restart the process again. So in other words, the process has got to be stopped and to remove the alcohol by distillation and start it again. So the process is actually starting, stop, starting, stop, starting, stop. And that is actually a disadvantage of using yeast. Right. so of using sugar for this process. Right. So the next thing, the other disadvantage is that it is the other disadvantage is 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 that which is actually a reverse of this. It is that as people actually talk about it as if it is carbon neutral, like you don't produce anything, but they disregard the fact that you use, vehicles, transportation, and machinery that use actually fuels. And at the end of the day, the carbon neutrality is a little bit dodgy, so this can be flipped on its head, really. But with the carbon neutrality, it can be flipped on its head. And you can actually say that it is not totally carbon neutral, but we are going to talk about it in a little bit. And the other disadvantage is that it stops production or reduces the production of food. Because what will happen, because fuels are a little bit you get a little bit of profit if you are a farmer by actually making fuel instead of making food, because obviously fuel is a little bit more will cost a little bit more and more as a farmer. So what will happen is that farmers will sacrifice producing food and make this, and this will raise the cost of of food. That is actually a very big disadvantage of using this. It once happened in Brazil. If you want to find out that Brazil, instead of producing sugarcane for sugar, right, what happened is that they were producing it for biofuel. So at the end of the day, right, the amount of sugar in the market reduced, and then the cost increased. The thing about demand, supply, stuff like that, which I'm not very, which I don't really know about. But those are the disadvantages. Right. So the other thing that I've forgotten to talk about in the conditions, I've just seen that the other condition is that because you are using a living thing, and this living thing is yeast, you need actually a temperature between 30 degrees Celsius and 40 degrees Celsius. And this is a very important condition because you are using an enzyme which can only its optimal temperature is this, right? 30 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius. I'm not going to go into that because I want to talk about that. This is more like biology. But let's go on to the this process where it is done in industry. The advantage is that it is actually that was supposed to be the advantage. The advantage is that it is it is a continuous process. It is a continuous process. Continuous process. Which is actually the opposite of actually batch process. And the batch process, that you stop, isn't? But this one, you continually produce this without actually even stopping the process. So it just goes on and on, right? And there's no stopping of this process, right? And that is actually a very big advantage. And the disadvantage is turning this on this you are making it from crude fuel, so from crude oil rather, so it is non-renewable. It is non-renewable. The other thing that you're going to notice that the alcohol, since there is nothing else that you are adding to it, the alcohol that you are going to produce is more pure. It doesn't mean it doesn't need a lot of, a lot of purification. So it is a little bit pure, right, than the alcohol that you produce from this from fermentation. So yes, so that's one of the disadvantage, and the other disadvantage is that it is produced in because it is produced in most countries that have got crude oil are not stable countries in terms of wars and stuff like that, and because of the political situations that are in those countries. So you can talk about those political things if you are left with nothing else to say, because that is actually a big disadvantage. So let's talk about another thing if you are good with that. So I talked about this thing being carbon neutral, being carbon neutral. Let's talk a little bit about this, because it's something that examiners like to talk about, because it is something that is going to actually affect a lot of you young people. So it is very important for us to talk about that. So what are we talking about? We are actually saying that let me stop this video a little bit so that I can continue in the next few minutes.